The Labour Party is a party of bourgeois, bohemian, metropolitan trendies, which loves having servants, cheap restaurants, cheap waiters, and all the things that they benefit from in the fat lives they lead in the capital. But it also relies on the votes of people who actually don't benefit from immigration, and it's discovered that if it's going to survive and if it's going to get back into office, it's going to have to grovel to them. It doesn't make any difference. The damage is already done. And also, you haven't admitted the other thing, which your former speechwriter, or rather New Labour's former speechwriter, Andrew Nether, admitted in the Evening Standard some years ago, which is that this was a deliberate policy to transform the country. And you meant it to be so.
Well, you've done it now.
There's no point saying, oh, we're sorry now we did that. You're not sorry at all. What you're sorry about is it's cost you popularity.
I don't know where you start reacting to that, but it's over to you.
Peter, you did do whatever you could to hasten the demise of the Cameron government.
Yeah, not very effective.
In fact, well, you actually advised people, or your readers, to vote for UKIP, which is a populist party primarily anti-immigration in its basis.
Well, I advised them to do that because I kept saying that they shouldn't vote at all, but they all seem to think that voting was some tremendously important process, which actually it isn't. If you go into a shop and you're offered a load of goods which you don't want to buy, you don't buy any of them. So why in an election do you vote for people you don't like?
All right. Okay.
Oh, well, if you want to know why the Conservative Party is out of touch with the people who once were Conservatives and would like to vote for it, and the reason why the Conservative Party is dying on its feet and has almost no members, it's nothing to do with this. It's because the Conservative Party is in favour of the European Union. The Conservative Party is against punishing criminals. The Conservative Party is in favour of the failed comprehensive experiment in education. The Conservative Party is in favour of mass immigration. That's why the Conservative Party is out of touch. The issue of same-sex marriage is so immensely trivial and unimportant. It's only raised as a wind-up to draw poor, silly old Conservatives out of their caves so that they can be made to look like bigots and fools and howled at and jeered at as homophobes by people.
Why would the Prime Minister want to do that?
Why would he want to do that? Because he hates his party. he hates most of the members of it. And
he wants to drag them down to defeat.
He loves to appeal to the Guardian newspaper and the BBC by bashing his own party and having rows with it. And that's the sole purpose of this. I don't imagine he cares in the slightest about the issue, but maybe he does, but I don't see... He doesn't care about anything else or believe in anything else, so it would be a change if he did. Mr. Slippery behaves like this. He just tries to wind up what's left of his own party because he thinks that's his only future, to make the people, to make the liberal bigots who genuinely hate and loathe people with conservative moral opinions and have no time for them at all and misrepresent them and lie about them, to make them think he's a good thing. That's his purpose.
We'll have to come back to
do you know how many people in this country, as a proportion of the population, are in civil partnerships? 1/5 of 1%. It is an extraordinarily small issue, affecting an extraordinarily small number of people, at the same time as we've just learnt from the census that marriage as an institution in general in this country is rapidly diminishing, and more people are not married for many, many reasons, mainly the result of government actions which have weakened it. Now, here we are arguing about this. What is actually going on here is not a liberation of homosexuals. It's an attempt to impose on the whole of society a new bigotry under which those who happen to hold the opinion that homosexual marriage should not take place will not just be excluded from the centre of things, they will increasingly be hounded and treated as pariahs, just, in fact, as homosexuals were treated before the 1967 law was rightly repealed. There is an immense, furious liberal bigotry, expressed actually by Mr. Self earlier on this evening when he said...
Yes, we will hound
quite
you.
Falsely, he said quite falsely that people who were against homosexual marriage didn't like homosexuals. This extremely unpleasant lie is repeatedly told by those who do not wish to debate this subject and who would hound anybody who stood in their way out of it with abuse and lies.
All right.
And this is the problem which our country faces. There is a new liberal bigotry which will not tolerate...
Don't propose to a gay man.
Will not tolerate and increasingly wishes to suppress conservative
Do you
opinion.
think we're going to be arresting you in toilets, Peter, and subjecting you to kind of aversion electroshock therapy in order to get you back to your views?
Do you know what, Will? I think that the time is coming when people who have conservative Christian opinions will actually face persecution of one kind or another. It hasn't come yet. But the problem is that we have become so willing in this country, and conventional wisdom has become so willing, to accept the liberal majority and the ideology of equality and diversity, which is now compulsory in all public services in this country, which you have to abide by to work in the public services, that the freedom to speak and think otherwise is increasing.
Let's move on to another question.
Yes, it is.
Thank you, Peter. Those who feel disillusioned with the current political system
are right to do so. They have been systematically betrayed, and I see no end to it. There are so many issues which have been visited on this country by an elite of self-selecting, closed-minded people, well represented here this evening, and actually largely incompetent as well, which have done enormous damage to our way of life. So, for instance, who now has anything to say about the deindustrialization of this country and the destruction of manufacturing jobs under the Thatcher government? Who can reverse it? Who can do anything about it? Who will say anything on this panel about the catastrophe of mass immigration, which has changed this country irrevocably into somewhere completely different from what it was? They won't talk about it. They won't talk seriously about the immense problems of crime and disorder, which affect millions of people in their homes and leave them utterly vulnerable to all kinds of unpleasantness and violence and menace, which they never used to have to undergo. And there is no sense whatsoever that there will be any reform of the criminal justice system or any attempt to put it right again. These are just some of the subjects
on which
this elite just constantly refuse to discuss.
Why?
Why? Because they themselves have an ideology. They themselves have the ideology of metropolitan bourgeois bohemians. They despise most people outside.
What are you, man of the people?
They despise. Well,
I mean, you're the only person on this panel.
I'm no more a man of the people than you are.
I don't claim to be, but you're making a picture on here.
I'm simply saying these are the things which they will not do anything about, which they will not do, because they themselves benefit. They themselves benefit from many of the things which do immense damage. They've benefited from globalization. They've benefited from mass immigration.
Let's talk about mass immigration. Let's talk about immigrants coming over here, propping up our NHS, treating us when we're
affected. They're not affected. Their children don't go to bog standard comprehensives. They're not affected. They're not affected by crime. Yes, I do know how to talk about it because I know what they do all the time. They will not discuss these things. They will not do anything about them. They ignore what you say, and you think that at general election time you can do something about it. No, the people who stand before you at general election time for the political parties are people who've been pre-selected. You have no control. If I stood for Parliament, or if he stood for Parliament, from our positions, which are quite popular, the fact is the party machines would erase us. The immense amounts of money they're capable of spending, the enormous access they have to the broadcasting organisations, which we don't have most of the time, would make it impossible. Make it impossible.
You've got more access than I have,
would make it impossible. On the contrary, would make it impossible for anyone outside
Peter, sorry. The question was, what would you say to people who feel like you clearly do about the current political association?
I just said it.
Well, no. Wait a moment. What would you say to them about how to change things? Are you going to stand as an MP?
I'm sorry.
Are you going to stand as an MP?
No, because for the reasons I've just explained, I wouldn't have the faintest chance. No, my advice to anybody young enough to do so is to emigrate before it's too late.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Peter Hitchens.
Well, first of all, can we get rid of this horrible expression, appropriate or inappropriate, and return to those nice, simple words, right and wrong? Was it right or was it wrong? Secondly, it seems obvious to me that the proper relationship between the press and politicians is that between a dog and a lamppost. Always should be, most of the time has been, and I do feel that it was extraordinarily unwise in getting so close to somebody for a senior newspaper executive to get so close to the government, to actually put themselves so very much in the government's pocket that they became effectively a part of government. And I remember the day that The Sun came out with its ridiculous trumpeting of praise for David Cameron, and the absurd semi-literate article which he penned, in which the main burden of it was that he was suddenly converted to the ludicrous cause of our war in Afghanistan, for which people are still dying today, even though he can't, when asked, explain why British troops are there. I do think that there's something very unhealthy about journalists actually becoming servants of government. I think that's one of the worst things about this. But there is another point. The gentleman at the top of the hall said that we should be discussing more important things. And I don't disagree with him that there are more important subjects than a lot of what's come up at the Leveson inquiry. But it does seem to me that freedom of the press is a very important part of our liberties. And the Leveson inquiry is constructing a coffin for freedom of the press in this country. It is absolutely amazing to watch politicians who are proposing to institute surveillance on everybody's phone calls, emails, and computer activity, launching an inquiry into the press because of phone hacking. Now, the thing about phone hacking is it's absolutely disgraceful and wrong, but it is against the law. And if you have been caught doing it and prosecuted for it and convicted for it, you will go to prison. There is no politicians' complaints commission. There isn't anything you can do about the politicians who fail you. There isn't actually much you can do about judges who fail you either. And yet here we have lawyers and judges happily smiling together as they prepare regulations which will make a free press in this country impossible. That is important. I think you should bear it very strongly in mind.
But the last bit first. From what I can see, Mr. Abbott is very much on the lines of modern fake conservatism. That is, quite a lot of neoliberalism about the economy, a far too close association with Rupert Murdoch, and a fair amount of rhetoric about moral conservatism close to elections, accompanied by doing nothing whatever about it when he has the chance to do so. I think that is a general characteristic of conservative parties who have for many, many years in the Anglosphere countries been betraying their supporters in that way. And not merely them, but the supposedly left-wing parties, the Labour parties of the Anglosphere, have also been betraying their conservative-minded supporters. They have become factions of metropolitan bourgeois bohemians who couldn't care less about the conditions of the poor and who are merely concerned with the luxury lives they live in their capital cities. And so there is a complete divorce between what many people want out of life and what their politicians decide. In terms of the British Conservative Party, if you really want to know, I mean, the best thing that could possibly happen to it would be that it split and collapsed, and I do all that I can to hurry this on, because nothing could be worse than it. I could carve a better political party out of a banana than the British Conservative Party without any difficulty indeed. But the problem is that in our system, and I think in yours as well, people vote tribally. And as long as these parties continue to exist at elections, enough people will vote tribally to keep them alive. And it's only if they collapse that the conservative-minded people of your country and mine will realize they have actually got no friends in government. The politicians in this country, they sit at the heads of parties which, if they tried to hold a flag day, no one would give a penny to. They rely entirely on dodgy billionaires and state support to keep themselves going. They represent almost nobody. They are themselves immensely incompetent and inexperienced. They've brought us nothing but disaster, mass immigration, uncontrolled crime, the worst education system.
If only the world was run by male columnists.
Look, Ed, I could do a better job than the world. You any day of the week. I could carve a better Chancellor Exchequer out of banana. Why should we be so glad to be run by these people who have no experience of anything and don't know anything and make a mess of everything they do? The crisis that we're in at the moment is caused by democratically elected politicians, allegedly. Why shouldn't you be glad that somewhere in our system there are restraints on them? I'm personally delighted. I think it should be more.
I think the democratically elected politicians of this country have messed it up. But are you seriously saying this country should be run by the monarchy?
Oh, look, no, I'm not saying the country should be a monarchy. This is, however, a constitutional monarchy, the best form of government known to man if it's properly run. But the trouble is, if it's run by the dead political parties we have at the moment, it actually needs some restraint on what they do. But it doesn't do any good being rude to people. Except to politicians who deserve it. It doesn't do any good being rude to people who are at the bottom end of society. Many of them are acting perfectly rationally. If you create an enormous welfare state, people will obviously go and collect the welfare which is offered to them, and they will behave in the way which the welfare state persuades them to do. That's why we're in such a mess. But until we get serious welfare reform aimed at bringing back the solid family life which people used to enjoy in this country and which used to be particularly good for the upbringing of children, then these problems will persist. And I just think Eric Pickles is showing off and pretending to be a conservative without actually being one, and offending people without doing any good.
And my mum struggled, and how dare you say that women single parents on council estates living on benefits are therefore by definition problem families? How dare you? Well, how dare you?
Had I said any such thing, your phony outrage would be justified, but as I didn't, it isn't, and you really do need to do a bit better than
I made a note.
Yes.
I made a note. You talked about problem families being fatherless, and you talked about them being on benefits, and that describes the family life. That describes me as a child, and we were not a problem family.
It's a subject under discussion. I didn't say anything about your family or anything of the kind. You're just engaging in phony outrage.
I am not
for
engaging
political
in phony
propaganda
outrage.
purposes, which is what your party always does. Yeah, so it's got nothing to do with it, but I'll answer the question anyway. The point here is actually a much deeper one. Emily Thornberry's party, as we now know because of the astonishing revelations of Andrew Nether, a former New Labour worker, deliberately hoped to transform this country through mass immigration during its time in office, and has very largely succeeded in doing so, as people in many parts of this country know very well. The extent of the transformation by mass immigration is unprecedented in our national history. The Conservative Party pretends to be against this, but also knows deep down that unless particularly we leave the European Union, it has no power to act on this matter. So every so often, word goes out from our Prime Minister, Mr. Slippery, to his ministers, to say, will you come up with something which sounds conservative, because we're losing too many votes to UKIP. And so out comes Eric Pickles with his stuff about problem families, and out comes Theresa May with her guidelines about immigration. I promise you, none of these things will happen. There will be no difference. The mass immigration will continue at its unprecedented levels. The country will continue to be transformed. If you're in favour of that, then that's fine. What my problem is, nobody was ever asked about whether we wanted this. And by the time we discovered that it had happened, it was too late to do anything about it. And I really do think people should be a little bit more discontented about that than they are.
Okay.
Thank you.